Do you think it's right that ultimately you think we want to stop a process that 17.4 million people voted for? Do you not think it'd be wise to just continue campaigning for a second referendum, not stop it completely?
Well, 30 million didn't vote for Brexit, so I mean, we can play that numbers game.
Do you think that Brexit has broken British politics?
Well, it's certainly done a lot of damage to the credibility of the country. It's caused a lot of very deep divisions, within families as well as more broadly. And it's still an insoluble problem. I mean, whatever happens, a lot of people are going to be very dissatisfied and very angry. And if Brexit goes ahead, we're going to have years more of uncertainty. So it has done a lot of damage. Whether it's reparable or not, I can't say. But it certainly had profoundly wounded the politics that I was familiar with.
Do you think that holding the referendum in the first place, which the Lib Dems did advocate at the time, do you think that ultimately that was a mistake?
Well, it was a terrible mistake. Actually, our own role in it was fairly ambiguous. I think in the 2010 election, it had found its way into our manifesto. I don't know how or why, but it had done. But we weren't promoting the idea. We were actually arguing that it was a way to bring to a conclusion the Lisbon process, because it was a constitutional change. We certainly weren't enthusiastic about an open-ended European referendum. And when Cameron advocated it publicly, I think 2014, I was then a member of the cabinet. I spoke out strongly against it. There was no demand for it. It was causing a lot of anxiety to some of our big inward investors like the Japanese. And Nick Clegg sort of jumped on it and made it very clear we wouldn't support it. So we did think it was a bad idea. When they got us off their backs after 2015, they were then free to indulge, but it was a terrible mistake.
Now, we've had quite a lot of defectors to the Lib Dems, the most recent one being Heidi Allen. What do you think that says about the Lib Dems' appeal now?
Quite a lot. I mean, I actually encouraged this process, and certainly in the last 6 months when I was leader, I spent a lot of time with these individuals, or some of them, particularly Chuka, who was the first to come across, and persuaded them that the Liberal Democrats were the place to come. And it wasn't just about Brexit. It was a sense that, going back to your first question, that British politics seemed to be breaking up, and the traditional left-right, Labour Conservative, class-based politics was giving way to something else, which I've written about in the past as the politics of identity. And it needed a party of more open, internationalist, liberal people who would absorb Social Democrats from the Labour Party, One Nation Conservatives from the Tories. Wasn't altogether a popular message in my own party, but I just wanted to make it bigger, a broader church, more inclusive, and a major force.
Do you know or hearing if any more MPs may be defecting? On conversations that you've had? Well,
yes. I mean, I know one or two individually who've talked to me and said they want to jump. Obviously, I can't name them. I think at this stage it's probably odd individuals. After the election, assuming we get one, I think there may well be a fracture in the Labour Party. And if it happens, then there is a possibility of us teaming up with large numbers of Labour Social Democrats.
What do you think will cause that fracture in the Labour Party? Ultimately Brexit or anti-Semitism?
Well, not an issue so much as the fact that the hard left, whatever we want to describe them, the kind of revolutionary left, the hard left, they clearly now have control of the Labour Party, of its organisation, as well as its policy making. And if they have an election and they do badly, because it's not guaranteed, but let's assume for the moment that they do, there will be an attempt to replace them with more traditional Labour people, more moderate people in the democratic socialist, social democrat tradition. And if that fails, then I can see a big schism.
I've been speaking to some Lib Dem members, and actually one member was telling me that he was thinking of organising an internal movement within the Liberal Democrat Party to oppose the revoke approach of the Liberal Democrat to revoke Article 50 and stop Brexit. Do you think it's right that ultimately you think we want to stop a process that 17.4 million people voted for? Do you not think it'd be wise to just continue campaigning for a second referendum, not stop it completely?
Well, 30 million didn't vote for Brexit, so I mean, we can play that numbers game. No, the revoke argument is a rather, how should I put it, a slightly sort of niche point. It's basically that if the Liberal Democrats won an election, and that means getting well over 300 seats, let's be clear about that, from where we are at the moment, which is 19 and 12 at the last election.
Still an increase.
It's a revolutionary change. It could happen. The odds are rather against it, I would suggest, without being disloyal. And if it did happen, we could argue we've been making the case against Brexit in a general election that further referendum is superfluous and muddy the waters. But I mean, in all practical purposes, I mean, we are the party of demanding a people's vote, and that's the core message. That's what we want, and we would abide by it, and we think that's the way to resolve the issue. The revoke point is it's a rather theoretical, hypothetical point, but the central issue is, we've got to have a people's vote. That's the only way to break the logjam.
Now, listening to what you said, I presume that you would disagree with Jo Swinson when she says that she thinks that realistically she could be the next Prime Minister at the next election.
No, I think she's quite right to say that, and I said that actually. No, if you're the leader of a party and you want the party to be taken seriously, which we do and she does, and rightly so, then you're aiming to get the largest number of seats and lead the country. It's a big stretch, but it's not totally unrealistic, and she's absolutely right to say that.
Now, you were talking about when you were leader that you actively encouraged parties working on a cross-party basis over the Brexit debacle. Do you think that Jo Swinson's attitude towards Jeremy Corbyn and refusing to back him as a potential leader of a government of national unity, do you think that she's risking the Remain alliance?
No, I don't think that's what happened. I think it has been misunderstood. Her position and our position was that if we do get into the position of a vote of no confidence and we need to replace the government with what people call the government of national unity, a cross-party temporary group, it's got to be led by somebody who commands the largest width of support in the House of Commons. All our readings were that Mr. Corbyn doesn't do that. And the argument is based on a lot of conversations with the independent Conservatives, the 21 Conservatives, who've made it absolutely clear, I think the vast majority of them, that under no circumstances would they put Jeremy Corbyn into Downing Street. So it does require looking for somebody else who has wider support. If she was saying, I'm not supporting Jeremy Corbyn because it's got to be me, people might have a complaint, but she's not saying that. She's saying, we want somebody who has a wider appeal, and that probably is an independent Tory. We've often argued Ken Clarke because of his seniority and his wisdom, but it could be a senior Labour person as well.
So presumably, let's say that there is an election in the next few weeks and Labour don't win the election, would you be willing to support them if they are a minority government? Would you go into coalition with them if they receive the highest number of votes?
Well, I won't be there, but I think the answer to the question is no. I always made it very clear when I was leader, and I think Jo has made this clear too, we're not going into coalition with Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party or with Boris Johnson. I mean, we can support particular measures that either or one or the other were to be put through if they were a minority government, but we're certainly not thinking of coalition.
Now, in terms of Boris Johnson's radical agenda, who do you think is responsible for that, Boris Johnson or Dominic Cummings?
Well, Cummings clearly is a major influence. We just don't know. I suspect that in his mind he probably has both options open. There is part of him that probably just wants to stay as Prime Minister. wants to pull his party back together again, but there's the other part of him, which Cummings probably is encouraging, which wants to break the traditional consensus, is also frightened of fighting an election against Farage. So I suspect he's been pulled in both directions, and we've seen both tendencies at work in the last week or so.
Finally, Sir Vince, I want to ask you, if we leave with a deal or no deal, what do you think the ramifications economically will be for this country?
Well, I think all the analysis, including by people who have no particular axe to grind, is that the impact's going to be negative. I mean, the question is how negative and for how long. I sometimes use the metaphor of a slow puncture versus a blowout. I mean, you might have a dramatic collapse of confidence, which would probably happen if you had a disorderly no deal. We've got some idea about what it looks like because we went through the financial crisis, and it knocked 6.5% off the economy, and we still haven't recovered 10 years later. So that's the bad outcome. If we leave with a deal, people probably wouldn't notice for quite a while, but 2-3 years on, we still haven't got a new trade arrangement with the European Union. Investor confidence remains low. Britain is seen as a bit of a backwater. It just acts as another drag on the low productivity of the country, and slowly, steadily pulls the country down. I mean, they're different scenarios, but they're both negative. If I was trying to be strictly fair-minded, there would be some gainers from a Brexit process. It would almost certainly push down the currency, and some sectors that would benefit from a low pound, like tourism, might actually get some benefit from it. But the overall net benefit would be negative.
Do you think then that you talked about some people would benefit from the currency going down? Do you think that there's truth in this belief that Brexit is just a hedge fund conspiracy?
No, I don't think it's a conspiracy. Actually, I was rather surprised to hear that argument because, most people have already hedged against sterling devaluation, and it's difficult to see how there's more in it. On one level, it's a kind of one-way bet, but if everybody else in the market is making the same one-way bet, you're not going to make any money out of it. So the idea that it's a conspiracy, I don't bear that. But clearly there are a lot of people who are, making all kind of gambles based upon the particular Brexit outcomes and the impact on the currency. Because the way we will feel Brexit, particularly if it's a no-deal Brexit, is through the currency. Because the Bank of England will try to offset the impact through a big injection of credit into the economy, as they did in 2016, and a lot of liquidity sloshing around, confidence factors. It's the currency that will take the strain. So it wouldn't be very surprising if there were people out there taking a punt on the currency.
Sir Vince Cable, thank you very much.
Thank you.